Welcome to Hebrew Insights. This channel is dedicated to revealing what has been lost in translation, providing biblical insights to help solidify your foundation, connecting the Christian faith to its Hebrew roots, and restoring the new to the old. Join me on a journey through the scriptures from a Hebrew perspective.
Today's topic, the Garden of Eden. In Genesis 2:4, we read in the English, "These are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens." The first word we're looking at is these in the English. It is ele in the Hebrew, and this means to swear, to put under oath. It is a legally binding agreement. It also means oak, which is to be strong and unbreakable. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as generations. This is toldot, and this means genealogy, a line of descent or development traced continuously from an ancestor. It also means proceedings, which is a series of events that happen in a planned and controlled way. It also means history, which is the whole series of past events connected with someone or something. And this word comes from the root yalad, which means to bring about, to birth, and to begin. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as Lord. It is Yahovah, and it means He is. And this word comes from the root Hava, which means to be and to exist. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as God. It is Elohim, and it comes from the root Ul, which means power, might, and strength. When we retranslate this verse with the Hebrew understanding, what we see is this legally binding testimony is the proceedings of existence of the heavens and the earth at their creation, in the day that He who exists of power, might, and strength made the earth and the heavens. What this is telling us is that we can trust, rely, and live firmly on the testimony of the proceedings of existence that was given in Genesis 1:1 to 2:3, as it was given under oath, and it is legally binding. We also see that Yahovah, the name of God, appears for the first time in the scriptures. This is done to establish that power, might, and strength, which brought forth existence, and all it entails, is Yahovah, the one who exists. This is where our story naturally breaks. Genesis 1:1 to 2:4 is the story of the creation of all things. It is an overview, a summary of the subject of creation. It is a synopsis, an outline of the plot of a book. And the plot of this book is humanity's choice, obedience or disobedience to their Creator's commands, and the reward, life, or consequence, death, that follows. It is an outline, a general description or plan giving the essential features of something, but not the detail. Genesis 2:5 and onwards is the story of the creation of man. It is in detail. It describes item by item and gives the full particulars of. It is in focus, a state in which things are seen clearly and sharply, a state or condition in which something can be clearly understood. In Genesis 2:5, we read, "Before any plant of the field sprouted on the earth, and before any herb of the field came forth, Yahovah Elohim did not send rain upon the earth, because there was no man to prepare the soil. We see from this verse that there was no grass, trees, or shrubs at this point, only soil. In 2:6, we read, condensation arose from the earth and watered the entire surface of the soil. And in 2:7, we read, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. The first word we're going to look at is formed. This is yatzar in the Hebrew, and it means to mold, to give shape to press or squeeze, as when pressing clay into a shape to form a vessel. It also means to give purpose. The next word we're looking at is afar, and this is translated in the English as dust, and this means fine particles of solid matter. The next word we're going to look at is translated in the English as breathed, and this word in the Hebrew is nafach, and this means to blow and to transfer. The next word we're going to look at is breath in the English, and it is neshama, and this is breath or spirit in the Hebrew. The next word we're going to look at is translated as life in the English. It is chai, and it means to exist, to make alive, to have life within, and the ability to inhale and exhale. The next words we're going to look at in the Hebrew is nafash chaya, and this is translated in the English as living being. It means alive. It means to be animated, to be a character. When we retranslate this verse with the Hebrew understanding, we see, and Yehovah Elohim molded the clay from the fine particles of the soil and transferred into its nostrils the spirit that gives life. And the clay was an animated character. So we're seeing quite a few things here. What we're seeing is that the condensation from the last verse and the fine particles of the soil is what he used to form the clay. The soil mixed with the water gave him clay. We also see that Yehovah is the creator of the human being. His fingerprints are all over the vessel. He took time to mold and to give shape and life to the human. This was up close and personal. Now we remember as well that the human was molded in the image, which we saw was the shadow of God, the shadow of the form that he took on in that moment when he made man. So this was very up close and personal. We also see that existence gave existence. Existence is Yehovah's name. It is the root of his name, and him transferring his spirit into the clay being is what gave him life. So he transferred existence from himself into this model. Think of CPR. When someone is not breathing, we blow air, we transfer spirit, we transfer life into that being. This is the image that we're seeing. And that breath, that spirit is what revives the human being. It's what makes him alive. So we see that the ability to inhale and exhale is required to have this form of life. We also see something very interesting. We see that this breath is not just the breath of life, but it is the breath of lives, meaning that this breath once began, it continues going forward. This breath reproduces at birth. In Genesis 2:8, we read in the English, "And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed." The first word we're going to look at is translated in the English as planted. It is natah in the Hebrew, and this means to set in place, to fix, and to plant. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as garden. It is ganan in the Hebrew, and it means to enclose, to surround with a rock wall, to close off, to defend, to cover over, and to protect during growth from roaming animals. The next word we're looking at is translated as Eden in the English. It is Adan in the Hebrew, and it means delight. It means paradise. The next word we're going to look at is translated in the English as eastward, and this is kadam in the Hebrew. It means to welcome, to greet, to introduce, to have an encounter. It also means east, and east is represented by sunrise. It means the onset, the beginning, a precedent. And a precedent is an earlier event or action that is regarded as an example or guide to be considered in subsequent similar circumstances. The next word we're going to look at is translated in the English as put. It is sum in the Hebrew, and it means to appoint, to establish, and to set. When we retranslate this verse with the Hebrew understanding, we read, Yehovah Elohim established boundaries in enjoyment from the initial encounter. He appointed there the man which he purposed. In this verse, we see precisely what the Garden of Eden is. We see that it is the boundaries of Yehovah's delight. We see that everything that brings him pleasure and he delights in are found within these boundaries. And this is where he chose to place the man. This is the home that he gave him and established the boundaries upon introduction. We also see that as the creator of the human, Yehovah Elohim sets boundaries and limits upon his creation that it must not transgress. We see that these boundaries offer protection. We also see that this is the purpose of the man. The reason why he was molded was to function within the boundaries of his creator. In Genesis 2:9, we read in the English, "And out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life also is in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil." The first word we're going to look at is translated as tree in the English. It is atzah in the Hebrew, and it means to anchor, to fasten, to counsel, and to plan. The next word we're going to look at is translated as pleasant in the English. It is chamad in the Hebrew, and this means to be pleasurable. The next word we're going to look at is translated in the English as sight, and it is mareh in the Hebrew, and it means appearance. And this word comes from the root ra'ah, which means to see, to discern. The next word we're going to look at is translated in the English as food, and it is achal in the Hebrew, and this means to consume, to absorb, to ingest, and to take in. This word also, achal, is food, and food is what is nourishment for growth and life. The next word we're going to look at is translated as life in the English. It is chai in the Hebrew, and it means to have life within, to continue life, to keep alive, to preserve. The next word we're going to look at is translated in the English as knowledge. It is yada in the Hebrew, and it means to know, to be acquainted, to be skillful, to have an intimate and personal understanding. The next word we're going to look at is translated as good in the English. It is tov in the Hebrew, and this means to be good, to be desirable, to fulfill the action for which a person or thing exists. It is something that functions in its intended purpose. The next word we're going to look at is translated in the English as evil. It is ra'ah in the Hebrew, and it means to be evil, to be undesirable. It is an impaired or abnormal, a wrong filling of purpose by transgressing the boundaries. It is something that does not function in its intended purpose. It means to be broken. When we retranslate this verse with the Hebrew understanding, what we see is Yahovah Elohim caused to grow from the foundation all counsel desirable in appearance and good for consumption. The counsel of everlasting life and the counsel of intimate understanding of being functional and being dysfunctional were within the enclosure. What we're seeing at this point is in the first half of the verse, all of the trees offer nourishment. When we look at the second half of the verse, what we see is that in addition to all the trees that were created, 2 more trees are created and introduced, and they are separated from the others. The trees in the first half of this verse that are good for consumption represent obedience. They are the trees that line the perimeter of the garden. We are then shown 2 more trees that are separated and singled out in the center of the enclosure. And this tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, intimate understanding of being functional and being dysfunctional, represents disobedience. This is the poison. The other tree, which is the tree of life, the counsel of everlasting life, represents the antidote to the poison of the first tree. It represents the antidote for death that is the consequence of partaking in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We also see that the option of disobedience is placed within the garden because man must actively choose obedience within an environment which offers disobedience as an option. By placing these 2 trees in the center of the garden, in addition to the trees that line the perimeter of the garden, Yahovah challenges the man by giving him choice. The choice between obedience and disobedience is represented in the form of these trees. Verses 10 through 14 take us away from the focus of the man in order to focus on the garden, on the boundaries that God has created and placed the man in. It gives us a bit more insight regarding this garden. Verse 10 states, "A river issued forth from paradise for the watering of the enclosure, and from there separated itself and was 4 beginnings." "11 states, "The first named Pishon, it surrounds all the land of Havilah, which there is gold." Verse 12 states, "The gold of the land, it is good. There is bdellium and the onyx stone." 13 states, "The name of the second river is Gihon. It surrounds all the land of Cush." Verse 14 states, "The name of the third river is Hiddekel. It travels east of Ashur. The fourth river, it is Parat." Now, what we're gathering from these verses is that The first two rivers surround two lands. Now, the surrounding of is the same idea of the boundaries, the enclosure. It surrounds the land. And this is the rivers closest to the garden. Now, as we move further east away from the garden, we see that the rivers no longer surround the land. And what we also see as we continue to read the Bible is that east is always represents the land of Babylon. It represents the land that surrounds it, such as Assyria as well as Persia. This is always indicated when it speaks of the east. So this is telling us that the further away from the garden, the less boundaries, the less the people will operate within the boundaries. So though this is just a few verses, and it kind of seems like it's random and in the middle of nowhere, it actually is giving us more information regarding this garden that is actually the boundaries of Yahovah. Moving on to verse 15, we read in the English, "Then the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it." The first word we're going to look at is translated in the English as took. It is lakach in the Hebrew, and it means to take, to accept. It also means to conquer. It also means knowledge, wisdom, and lesson. The next word we're going to look at is translated in the English as put, and this word in the Hebrew is yanach, and it means to guide. It is one who leads or directs another in his way. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as tend, and it is avad in the Hebrew, and this means to serve, to work, to provide a service to another. The last word we're going to look at is translated in the English as keep. It is shamar in the Hebrew, and it means to preserve, to protect, to defend, to guard, to keep watch, and to observe. When we retranslate this verse with the Hebrew understanding, what we see is Yahovah Elohim taught the man, and he guided them in the boundaries of enjoyment to serve and to preserve. We have to ask ourselves questions as we read the scriptures. We have to ask questions such as, why did Yahovah put the man he molded in the garden he planted? And we see that it is because the man's home is within the boundaries of Yahovah's delight. This is where he is to live. We have to also ask, what was the primary responsibility given to the man once he was placed in the garden? And we see that the man was tasked with keeping, with living within the boundaries placed on him by his creator. How we serve Yahovah, how the man is to serve Yahovah, is by observing his boundaries. As he observes the boundaries are preserved. Preservation comes through observation. In verse 16, we read in the English, "And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat." The first word we're going to look at is commanded in the English. It is savah in the Hebrew, and it means to direct, to cause to turn, to move or point undeviatingly, or to follow a straight course, to give instructions or orders for a path to be taken. The next word we're going to look at is translated in the English as freely. It is achal in the Hebrew. We've seen this word before. It is food. It is the nourishment for growth and life. The next word we're looking at is translated in the English as eat. It is also achal, and it means to consume, to absorb, to ingest, to take in. These words are one and the same. When we retranslate this verse with the Hebrew understanding, what we see is Yehovah Elohim gave orders for a path to be taken upon the man, saying, from all trees of the boundaries is food for consumption. So what he's doing here is he is focusing in on the trees that line the perimeter of the garden. We spoke of these trees back in verse 9, how these trees are separate from the trees that he placed within the middle of the garden. So he's telling the man that the trees that line the perimeter, the trees other than the two trees in the middle of the garden, are food for consumption. He is assigning to the man what the man's food is. In verse 17, we read, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. The first set of words we're going to look at in the English are, you shall not eat. In the Hebrew, this is lo tochel mimenu, and this means don't you consume from it. The next set of words we're going to look at is translated in the English as surely die, and in the Hebrew, this is mot tamut, and this means death, you die. When we retranslate this verse with the Hebrew understanding, what we see is, but from the tree of the knowledge of operating functionally and operating dysfunctionally, don't you consume from it. Because in the day you consume from it, death, you die. When we look at this verse, we must ask ourselves, what were the instructions given to the man by his creator for living in the garden? And we see that the man is to enjoy the freedom of options that are offered within the set boundaries of his creator. Now, what are the freedom of options that have been offered? We see that the options are all of the trees that line the perimeter of the garden. From any of those trees, the man is free to consume. Yehovah said that they are good for consumption, but he is not to transgress the boundaries by partaking in what has been prohibited. And what has been prohibited is the tree within the middle of the garden of the knowledge of good and evil. It is the counsel of being intimately acquainted with the knowledge of operating functionally and operating dysfunctionally. His creator makes it very clear that if he eats from this tree, that he will die. So he is separating what is food for the man and what is not food for the man. Though the trees look pleasant, and though the trees all look like food, he is making the distinction between the trees, and the man must discern and understand that just because it might look like food doesn't mean that it is food. What is food? We saw that food is the nourishment for growth and for life. So we see that the fruit that comes from this tree, though it may appear to be food, it does not offer nourishment for life and for growth. It actually offers the opposite. It offers death. So we see that his creator is telling him right out of the gate that this is not food for him to consume. We see that if he consumes this, he is committing suicide. He has been told that it will lead to death. We see that to take part in what is prohibited is evil. And the Hebrew word for evil is avel, and it means to be lawless and to be disobedient. As we do with every video, here are your connections. Here they are for verse 4. Verse 7. Verse 8. verse 9, verse 15, verse 16, as well as verse 17.
I'd like to close in prayer. Yehovah bless you and guard you. Yehovah make his face shine upon you and grant you favor. Yehovah lift up his face toward you and grant you restitution. Place my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Hebrew Insights, or click the subscription button in order to receive notifications regarding next week's video. Until then, Yehovah bless you and guard you.